The crash of the door ripped through the silence, followed by the blinding glare of flashlights. Boots pounded across the hardwood floor, voices shouting commands into the dark. But the men charging in had no idea that the woman they were waking from sleep wasn't just any citizen. She was a trained FBI agent, and she had no intention of becoming their victim. Nicole Parker had always been a light sleeper, the kind who woke at the smallest creak in the house. But that night, it wasn't a creak that stirred her. It was the violent sound of wood splintering, sharp and sudden, like a tree snapping in a storm. Her eyes flew open, heart kicking into overdrive as her ears caught the heavy thud of boots hitting her hardwood floor downstairs. She didn't move right away. She let her mind process in a flash what her instincts had already decided. This was not a dream. This was not a neighbor knocking at the wrong door. This was a breach. Years in the FBI had conditioned her to separate fear from action, so while her pulse roared in her ears, her hands moved automatically, reaching for the Glock 19 on her nightstand. The cold metal was reassuring, a familiar weight that reminded her she was not helpless. She slid silently out of bed, feet barely touching the carpet, her breath slow and controlled despite the chaos below. Voices were barking orders, in short, bursts: clear that room, check the back, move, move, the clipped cadence of trained men on a mission. She edged toward the door of her bedroom, every muscle tense but deliberate. Knowing a single misstep could mean giving away her position. Peering through the crack into the hallway, she caught the flicker of flashlight beams slicing through the dark. They weren't thieves. They weren't random home invaders. They were tactical, systematic, clearing the house with precision. That could only mean law enforcement. But if they were police, why here? Why her? She hadn't been briefed on any operation involving her address, and the Bureau's protocol was clear. No agency touched a federal agent's residence without direct coordination. Still crouched low, she began moving toward the top of the staircase, the Glock angled low but ready. Her bare feet found the spots on the floor she knew wouldn't creak. Years of surveillance work had taught her how to move like a shadow, and now that skill might save her life. From the landing she saw them more clearly, men in black tactical gear, rifles raised, helmets strapped tight. One's badge caught the edge of a flashlight beam, and her stomach dropped. They were local cops. She'd worked alongside enough SWAT teams to recognize the setup instantly. And they had no idea she was here. No idea she was armed. No idea she was one of them, and worse, that she was a black woman alone in her own home. At 2 a.m. Nicole's mind snapped into calculation mode. If she stayed hidden, they might mistake her for a suspect and open fire. If she rushed down, she could get shot before they even processed her words. Her only option was to control the moment. Make them see her, hear her, and recognize her. Authority before their adrenaline got them killed. She stepped into the open space at the top of the stairs, keeping the Glock angled toward the floor, and her left hand raised high. Federal agent, FBI. She called out, her voice sharp and commanding, the kind of tone that sliced through noise on a chaotic scene. The effect was instant. The two nearest officers froze mid-step, rifles still raised but not firing, their heads jerking toward her. One, a tall man with tense eyes behind his visor, shouted back, "Show me your hands." She raised both slowly, keeping her weapon dangling harmlessly by the trigger guard in her right hand, then knelt and set it gently on the floor. "I'm armed. Weapon is down. Credentials in the top drawer by the stairs," she said, keeping her tone steady and professional. The tall man kept his rifle trained on her as another officer moved toward the drawer, pulling out the black leather case that held her FBI badge and ID. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind of silence that comes when reality crashes into a bad mistake. The tall man's eyes darted from her photo to her face, and his voice shifted, almost awkward. "Ma'am, there's been a mix-up." She didn't move, didn't lower her hands. "Define mix-up," she said flatly. The words tumbled out quickly. Wrong address, high-risk warrant, armed suspect living 2 streets over. Dispatch had given them her house number, and in the rush of a late-night operation they'd gone in hard. She listened without blinking, each explanation sounding more absurd the longer he spoke. Inside, a cold anger started building, not the wild fury of someone caught off guard, but the controlled burn of someone who understood exactly how close she'd come to being another headline. One wrong twitch, one officer not hearing her voice clearly, and she would have been a dead woman in her own hallway, her body cooling on the hardwood while they argued over what went wrong. She finally lowered her hands, slow and deliberate, and the tension in the air eased a fraction. But her eyes stayed locked on the man with the badge. "Get your team out of my house," she said quietly. He gave a quick nod and relayed the order, and within minutes the boots that had stormed in were stomping back out, the beams of their flashlights fading into the night. Nicole stayed at the top of the stairs, watching until the last one was gone, only then letting out the breath she'd been holding. The house was silent again, but the air still felt charged, like the aftermath of a lightning strike. She picked up her Glock, slid it back onto the nightstand, and sat on the edge of her bed, staring into the dark. Sleep was impossible now. In her mind, she replayed the scene again and again, each time seeing the moment where a finger could have twitched, on a trigger, where her name could have been read on a police report instead of an ID badge. And she knew this wasn't just about her. It was about every black person who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Every innocent life taken because someone didn't double-check a detail. She was alive because she'd been trained, because she'd kept her head, but survival didn't erase the fact that her home had been violated, her life nearly ended by people who claimed to protect it. She lay back against the pillows, eyes open to the shadows on the ceiling, and made herself a silent promise. This story wouldn't stay between her and a few embarrassed cops. The world was going to hear it, and they were going to hear it from her. The morning light crept through the blinds like an unwelcome guest, illuminating the mess the officers had left behind. The jagged splinters of her front door scattered across the entryway, muddy boot prints smeared along the polished hardwood, a framed photo of her and her late father knocked from the wall and lying face down on the floor. Nicole moved slowly, her bare feet crunching over debris as she took in the quiet wreckage. She was still wearing the same tank top and sweatpants from the night before, though her mind felt years older than it had 8 hours ago. A faint ache pulsed in her jaw from how hard she'd clenched it during the raid, but the real tension was buried deeper, in the hollow space between her ribs. She picked up the picture frame, brushing away a thin layer of dust, and stared at her father's face, his eyes steady, his smile calm. He'd been a police officer for nearly 20 years before his death. The kind of man who believed in rules, in justice, in doing the job right. And now, the people who wore the same badge he once carried had nearly killed his daughter in her own home. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, breaking her reverie. The caller ID flashed Special Agent Kay Ramirez, her direct supervisor at the bureau. She answered, her voice still scratchy from lack of sleep. "I heard," Ramirez said without greeting. "Local PD called it in. Are you all right?" Nicole's instinct was to say yes, the default toughness every agent wore like armor, but instead, she let the pause speak for her. "Physically, yeah," she said finally, "but they kicked my door in at 2 in the morning and aimed rifles at me in my own house. I'm not just going to shrug that off." Ramirez exhaled, the kind of weary sigh that told her he was already bracing for the fallout. "The chief's going to call you. He's concerned. Wants to apologize personally. I'd recommend hearing him out before you make any moves." Nicole almost laughed at that. An apology was the bare minimum when a team of armed men broke into your home by mistake. "I'm not looking for a handshake and a sorry, Ken," she said flatly. "I want to know how their dispatch got my address. I want the body cam footage, and I want to know who signed off on busting into a house without triple-checking the target." Ramirez hesitated, then lowered his voice as if someone might be listening. "Be careful, Parker. You know how it goes when one agency starts poking at another. Politics get ugly." "Politics almost got me killed," she shot back. "So they can get as ugly as they want. I'm not letting this slide." She hung up before he could say more. For the next hour, she moved through her home, cataloging the damage, taking photos with her phone, the busted lock, the kicked-in hinges, the shattered wood near the frame. Her training told her to treat it like a crime scene, and in a way, it was. Her privacy had been violated, her safety compromised, and she had the evidence to prove it. At exactly 10:17 a.m., her phone rang again. This time, it was Chief Daniels of the Metro Police Department. His voice was low, measured, almost too calm, as if choosing each word like it was part of a legal statement. He apologized for the unfortunate incident, assured her the department was conducting an internal review, and stressed that the officers involved had acted in good faith under time-sensitive intelligence. Nicole let him finish, then asked the one question he clearly didn't want to answer. "Chief, do you realize what could have happened if I hadn't identified myself fast enough? If I'd reacted like any other woman woken up to men in her home at 2 in the morning?" There was a pause on the line, then a carefully delivered, "Yes, Agent Parker, I do." She could hear the discomfort in his tone, the awareness of how close they'd come to disaster. "Then I expect full transparency," she said. "That means unedited body cam footage and a full incident report on my desk by tomorrow." He made a non-committal promise to see what could be done, and the call ended. Nicole stood in the middle of her living room, staring at the doorframe where the lock used to be, and felt the anger settling into something colder, sharper. This wasn't just a personal violation, this was systemic failure. A wrong address, bad intel, no double check, and suddenly an innocent person was seconds away from being a casualty. She'd seen cases like this before, read reports of raids, gone wrong, but reading about it and living through it were two very different things. Her neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, knocked gently on the open frame of the broken door, her eyes wide with worry. "Honey, I heard all the commotion last night. Are you all right?" Nicole forced a small smile. "I'm fine. Just some overzealous cops who didn't read the map right." Mrs. Jenkins shook her head. "Shameful. You should tell someone. Tell everyone." Nicole felt a flicker of resolve. Maybe she would not for sympathy, but because she knew there were others who hadn't been so lucky. By early afternoon, she'd already spoken to an attorney friend, filed a formal complaint with the bureau, and started drafting a statement. She didn't know if she'd take it to the press yet, but the words were forming in her head like a case file. precise, detailed, impossible to ignore. As the sun dipped lower, Nicole sat at her dining table with her laptop open, her notes spread out, and the broken door still yawning open to the street. She wasn't just rebuilding her home after the raid, she was building a record. Something told her this was only the beginning. The email came 3 days later, arriving in her bureau inbox under the subject line "Requested Materials Confidential." Nicole clicked it open, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the attachments. 4 body cam videos, each time-stamped, from the night of the raid, along with a PDF of the Metro PD's incident report. The videos were large files, slow to buffer, but she watched them one after another, her face tightening with every passing minute. The first feed showed the officers, lined up outside her home, their rifles ready, the team leader confirming the address over the radio, her address. A dispatcher's voice came back muffled, but clear enough. Confirmed. Target inside. Nicole froze the video, replayed it twice, then 3 times, her brain ticking through the implications. This wasn't a typo. Someone had given them her location deliberately. The second video made her stomach turn. The team was on her porch, one officer glancing at a printed photo of a man, the suspect they were supposedly there to arrest, and then at the front of her house. "You sure this is it?" one officer muttered, his tone hesitant. The team leader didn't even pause before saying, "Intel says yes, let's go." No knock, no second confirmation, just the battering ram slamming into her door. The third and fourth videos captured the chaos inside, the shouting, the beams of light cutting across her furniture, the way they moved through her home like it was enemy territory. She heard herself in the distance, that sharp, commanding, federal agent, FBI, cutting through the noise, the startled reactions, the sudden stop in movement. But what chilled her most wasn't the footage of her. It was the moment, barely a second long, when one officer's rifle sight hovered directly over her chest before he lowered it. She sat back in her chair, breathing slowly, her fingers gripping the edge of the desk. This wasn't just sloppy police work. This was a deliberate, reckless operation built on bad information. And someone in that chain had been confident enough to send them into a home with weapons drawn. She opened the incident report next, scanning for explanations, but the document was a sanitized version of events. The report claimed they had acted upon verified intelligence indicating the presence of an armed suspect, and that upon realizing the identity of the occupant, the operation was terminated without incident. Terminated without incident. The phrase made her jaw clench. It was the kind of bureaucratic language designed to erase the fact that she had been seconds from death in her own hallway. Nowhere in the report was there mention of the wrong photo, the officer's hesitation, or the fact that dispatch had confirmed the address without a shred of accuracy. Nicole printed the report, the hum of the machine filling her small, with office, and spread the pages across the table alongside her own notes. Her training had taught her to break down cases piece by piece, to trace every decision back to the source, and that's exactly what she intended to do here. But the difference now was that she wasn't just the investigator, she was the victim. That made her both more dangerous and more determined. She called Ramirez, told him she had reviewed the materials, and there was something seriously wrong. He told her to be cautious about making accusations without proof of intent. "Ken," she said, her voice level, "someone pointed a rifle at me in my own house because their so-called intel put me there instead of the real suspect. If that's not worth raising hell over, I don't know what is." He sighed, told her to keep it internal for now, and hung up. But Nicole knew keeping it internal would only bury it. Late that night, she saved the videos to an encrypted drive and sat staring at her laptop screen, weighing the risk of sending them to a contact she had at a national news outlet. She could already hear the headlines: FBI agents home raided, in botched SWAT operation, a story that would embarrass the Metro PD and raise questions no one in leadership wanted to answer. Her phone buzzed just then, a message from an unknown number. "Back off. Accidents happen." No signature, no other words. Nicole stared at it, her mind instantly cataloging the possibilities: a warning from someone in the department, a bluff from a guilty party, or maybe just a coward trying to scare her into silence. Either way, it had the opposite effect. If she'd been angry before, now she was resolute. Whoever had orchestrated that raid hadn't expected her to fight back. They'd assumed she would take the apology, replace her door, and move on. But Nicole Parker had spent her career hunting people who thought they could hide behind mistakes. She closed her laptop, slipped the encrypted drive into her bag, and stood by the window, watching the empty street below. Somewhere out there was the truth, and she was going to find it, even if it meant taking on her own. By dawn, Nicole had already decided that waiting for the official channels to review the incident would be nothing more than slow burial. She'd seen this playbook before: internal reviews that stretched on for months, reports that were carefully edited to strip out anything explosive, and finally, a quiet statement that no wrongdoing had been found. She wasn't going to be another name swallowed by red tape. Pulling on jeans, a dark jacket, and her bureau-issued ankle holster, she tucked a badge into her back pocket and slid the encrypted drive into her inner coat lining. Her first stop wasn't the bureau office or the Metro PD, it was the One place she knew would still have the raw, unfiltered version of the suspect's profile: the state crime database. She didn't log in under her own credentials. That would set off a chain of alerts and questions. Instead, she borrowed access from an old friend in the cyber division, someone who owed her a favor from a messy joint operation 2 years back. The suspect's name popped up almost instantly: Randall Epps, 34, known associate of 2 local gangs, with 3 prior arrests for armed robbery. His last known address wasn't even close to hers, but Nicole noticed something buried deeper in the file: an alias that matched a mailing address in her neighborhood. Her stomach tightened. The alias David Green had been linked to a string of small-time gun sales and was registered to a P.O. box at a shipping store barely 5 blocks from her home. That was enough for sloppy intel to confuse the two addresses, unless of course it wasn't confusion at all. She printed the details, folded them into her jacket pocket, and drove to the shipping store. The place was barely awake, the smell of burnt coffee hanging in the air as a clerk flipped the open sign. Nicole flashed her badge, watching the clerk's eyes flicker nervously. "Box 311, she said. "Who rented it?" The man hesitated, glancing toward the back. "We can't," she cut him off with a tone that didn't invite argument. "Federal investigation." Now, he pulled up the record reluctantly. The renter was listed as David Green, paid in cash for 6 months at a time, but when she asked for the ID used to open the account, the image wasn't of Randall Epps, it was of a man she didn't recognize, clean-cut with the kind of face that could disappear in a crowd. She snapped a photo of the record with her phone and left, the question gnawing at her. Who was this man, and how did his alias lead a SWAT team to her front door? Driving back, she ran through the possibilities. Either someone had intentionally fed Metro PD her address, knowing it would trigger a raid, or there was a deeper operation at play, one that involved her without her consent. Back at her home, the broken door now replaced with a temporary plywood sheet, she spread her notes across the kitchen table. She cross-referenced EP's known associates with the mystery man from the P.O. box record, running their names through facial recognition software. No match. But when she fed the photo into a broader law enforcement database, something pinged. The man was flagged as a confidential informant for the Metro PD in an unrelated drug case. That stopped her cold. If the informant was tied to Metro PD, then the bad intel that put the raid at her house didn't come from a random mistake. It came from inside their own system. And if that was true, then someone in that department was either grossly incompetent or deliberately setting her up. The phone call from Ramirez came just as she was piecing it together. "Parker, where are you?" His voice was tense, urgent. "At home," she said, glancing at the files. "Why?" "Because I just got word from Metro that you've been asking questions about their CI program. That's sensitive territory. You need to back off." She almost laughed. "Sensitive? Ken, their confidential informant gave them my address, and you're telling me to back off?" He didn't answer right away, which told her everything she needed to know. There was pressure coming from above, and it wasn't just about jurisdiction. "You're not going to like what you find," he said finally. "Maybe not," she replied, "but I'm going to find it anyway." After the call, she packed a small go-bag laptop, encrypted drive, printed files, a change of clothes, and locked it in her car. If someone in Metro PD was nervous enough to send her a warning text, they might be bold enough to escalate. She wasn't going to be caught off guard twice. That night, she parked outside a dingy bar on the east side where she knew Randall Epps sometimes ran with his crew. She stayed in the shadows, hood pulled low, watching the door until he showed. EP's was taller than she expected, moving with the cocky looseness of a man who thought he was untouchable. She followed him at a distance when he left, tailing him to a rundown apartment complex. She waited until he was inside before approaching a neighbor smoking on the stoop. "EP's ever mentioned the name David Green?" she asked casually. The neighbor smirked. "Green? Yeah, that's his ghost. Runs guns under that name. But he ain't Green. Green's somebody higher up. EP's answers to him." Nicole's pulse quickened. She thanked the man and walked back to her car, her mind already spinning. Green wasn't just a random alias. He was real, connected, and high enough in the chain that people were willing to lie, or even risk lives to protect him. And now she knew 2 things for certain. The raid on her house wasn't an accident, and whoever David Green really was, he'd just moved to the top of her list. 2 nights later, Nicole finally had the break she'd been waiting for. A quiet tip came from her cyber division contact. David G. Green was set to meet someone at a shuttered warehouse on the industrial edge of the city, the kind of place where no one asked questions and cameras mysteriously stopped working. She didn't loop in the Bureau or Metro PD. The fewer people who knew, the better. She went alone, wearing dark jeans, a windbreaker, and her ankle holster. The air was cold, the streets empty, the kind of stillness that made every sound carry. She parked 2 blocks away, moving in on foot, her senses tuned sharp. From the shadow of a loading dock, she spotted him, the man from the P.O. box photo, standing under a dim security light with another figure she didn't recognize. They spoke in low voices, their body language casual but guarded. Nicole edged closer, using a line of stacked crates as cover. Snatches of conversation drifted her way. Had to divert them. No blowback to me. She wasn't supposed to be home. Her pulse spiked at that last one. She wasn't supposed to be home. That was no coincidence. No bad intel. That was a setup. She stepped from the shadows, Glock drawn but lowered. Funny thing about secrets, she called out, her voice cutting across the quiet. They sound a lot louder when you hear them in person. Both men spun around. Green's eyes narrowed, recognition flashing. Agent Parker, he said, his tone smooth, almost mocking. You're not supposed to be here. Neither are you, she replied, keeping her distance but her stance steady. You gave Metro PD my address, sent a SWAT team into my home. Why? He gave a little shrug, like the question bored him. Collateral damage. The target was supposed to be your neighbor, friend of EP's, but the chief wanted you rattled. Thought you'd drop a case you were working. The casualness of his confession made Nicole's skin crawl, so you put my life on the line. To send me a message, she said, voice tight. Green smirked. You lived, didn't you? The other man shifted uneasily, his eyes darting toward the street as if calculating an escape. Nicole's finger tightened on the trigger. You're done hiding behind bad intel and uniforms, she said. This ends tonight. Green's smirk faded into something colder. You think you can take me in? You've got no backup, no warrant, and no one's going to believe you over me and the chief. That was his mistake, assuming she'd walked in unprepared. From her pocket she pulled out a small recording device, its red light blinking. Every word you just said is enough for obstruction, conspiracy, and attempted murder, she said evenly. And I'm guessing the Bureau will be very interested in a Metro PD informant who manipulates raids to protect himself. For the first time, Green's confidence cracked, a flicker of calculation in his eyes as he stepped back. You don't know what you're getting into, he warned. This goes higher than me. Maybe, Nicole said, but you're the one, standing in front of me. She moved forward, closing the distance, and in a swift motion, disarmed him, his concealed pistol clattering to the ground. The other man bolted, footsteps echoing into the night, but Nicole didn't follow. She cuffed Green, reading him his rights in a low, steady voice, each word deliberate. By the time backup arrived, summoned by an encrypted ping she'd sent to Ramirez before making her move, Green was sitting against the warehouse wall, wrists bound, his earlier smugness replaced by a simmering glare. Ramirez approached, eyes scanning the scene. You always did like doing things the hard way, he muttered, but there was a trace of admiration in his voice. You got it all. She handed him the recorder, everything. Body cam footage, intel trail, his confession. Enough to bury him and anyone covering for him. As Green was hauled into the back of a black SUV, Nicole stood in the cold, letting the night air clear the adrenaline from her veins. She knew this wasn't the end of the corruption. Green was just one thread in a much larger knot, but it was enough for now. Enough to prove that what had happened to her wasn't a mistake, and that she could fight back and win. Driving home, she passed the quiet streets of her neighborhood, her house now secured with a new steel door. The plywood was gone, but the memory of that night would never leave. She parked, sat for a moment in the stillness, and looked at the faint glow of her living room lamp through the window. She thought of her father, of the way he'd taught her that the badge meant something only if you protected the innocent, and how easily that truth could be twisted. She'd survived the raid, the warnings, and the danger, but more than that, she'd exposed the lie. Locking the door behind her, she poured herself a glass of water, feeling the weight of the week finally ease from her shoulders. Tomorrow, there would be reports, interviews, and headlines. But tonight, for the first time since it began, she felt safe in her own home, and that was enough. This ending keeps the suspense high, ties up the conspiracy, and leaves Nicole victorious while hinting at a larger corruption she could face in the future. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters. Subscribe to The Black Struggle for more powerful and eye-opening stories you won't forget.